In this video, I'm going to share with you my special technique for animating water. Hello everyone. Today I want to share with you some of the research, some of the things I've been learning about how to animate water. I can't just teach you how to animate water in one video because there's just so much that I could teach, and water comes in many different forms. For example, you've got like splashes, but then you've also got waves, you've got ripples, jets of water, running water in like streams and rivers and things, and they all behave slightly differently. So I'm just going to focus on one particular trick, like a tool that I think is going to help you in a lot of different scenarios for water. It particularly helps you with animating water splashes. It will give you a quick and simple introduction to animating water. It's kind of extracted, so there's nothing really around it, that it's not really in an environment. We can just focus on it specifically, and it will look something like this. I kind of rushed this, so I hope it looks okay, but this is what it looks like. Oops. Okay, so the first phase of the sheet, this is high energy, straight directional lines. Now, the second stage, the directional energy is starting to get lost. So it's slowing down, and you'll see that those straight lines are now, there is now some curves to them. They're not as straight as they were. Number three, the sheet starts to pull apart. And so this is all part of it losing energy, and it's also part of this very important principle with water, which is surface tension. Now, I want to do a whole video on surface tension. I don't have time, but so basically these negative spaces start being introduced, and they get larger and they become more frequent. So there are more negative spaces that get introduced with each frame. And this is the surface tension. So this thing that kind of holds the water together. The larger the scale of your splash, the less you will be able to notice the surface tension. And the smaller scale splashes are very, very controlled by the surface tension. So you see here that this is actually a medium to small sized splash. It's actually pretty small. Now, if you did a massive splash, you know, maybe if a boat is being thrown into the water, then surface tension will behave in a different way. Just wanted to pause to let you know that I create a lot of extra video material for my supporters over on Patreon. In fact, to complement this video, I added an exclusive bonus video on Patreon all about large-scale water splashes and how they are treated a bit differently from ordinary water splashes. So if you'd like to see that video, head over to my Patreon page and consider signing on. So the sheet pulls apart. We can see that already with these, they're starting to get turned into these water droplets, so they've kind of been pulled apart already. So there's this negative space part appearing here, and on the next frame I draw it to become bigger and to expand. What I'm now paying attention to, now I've drawn that, the kind of absence of space, I'm looking for how that affects the water sheet. So now it's going to have altered the shape of the sheet. So you see here, it's actually, there's only a thin amount here. Now when this expands, that part is taken away completely, like that, and it opens up that gap. So just look at how the interaction of these cavities, I guess I could call them cavities, look at how they interact. When the cavities grow, they're going to affect the positive space. The negative and positive space are always interacting with each other in this and creating new shapes. And now these parts are like independent of the main sheet. And this is going to happen more and more as we go on. So number 4, the sheet turns into strings and beads and and the holes increase in size and number. And strings, so strings are like these long thin parts. They might look a little bit like that. One of the things the little tricks I do with these droplets is the shape is like an oval like this. A little thing I like to add, it's like my own touch, is that on certain frames I will make them wobble. And the way you make them wobble is if you draw one like that shape, on the next frame you draw them like that, or something like that. So then they kind of, when they're in the air, they sort of wobble around. And if you've ever looked in ultra slow motion at water droplets, this tends to be what they do. They do a little wobble like that. So that's just a little trick that I have up my sleeve that I sometimes pull out on bits like this where you've got these droplets. So you see here I'm kind of changing the angle of them a little bit to introduce that wobble. And then the water starts to fall back down. If you imagine it on a graph, you know, just like a bouncing ball, it will go up and then it will have to come back down. Height, altitude and time. Remember that all of the water here is following that. However, I found that the parts of the water which have been given the most energy, so these parts like right up here, they will take longer to fall back down because they've gone further up. And one thing you can do if you're cheeky, just sort of copy and paste them from frame to frame and just drag them down this part just to speed it up, because so you can take your droplets and just move them down, and then if you want to get that variation in the speed, you can just stretch them like that, so that if you stretch it, those top droplets, which are going to be the last to hit the water, they stay there for longer. A pool, a bathtub, pond, a lake, anything like that, you know, the water's going to hit the surface and create secondary splashes. You need to have an idea at least of where the surface is in 3D space, you know, so it's going to be something like that, so that you know where they're going to hit the water. Towards the end you will really be wanting to stop, because there's so many, you know, you've got to bring all of these down, have all of them splash. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of detail that goes into this. But yeah, that's basically what a water sheet looks like. And if you're able to do this, I recommend you try one of these for yourself. Now, I've made a few more notes here. I would suggest that you get used to seeing these water sheets in 3D space. When you start having to do it in a 3D space like this, it starts to become a little bit more tricky. So that just takes practice and perception. You know, you need to be able to see it in 3D space after a while. If you want to make it look good and you want to spend as little time on it as possible, you've got to really pay attention to the timing of these sheets of water. The timing is what's going to sell the splash more than anything, in my experience. To really sell the weight of this, it stays at the top for quite a while. It kind of lingers at the top, you see here, and then it falls back down, you know. So if you can get it to go like that kind of motion, that will really sell the effect, and it will make it look a lot better. And if you get the timing right, then you'll actually be able to get away with less frames on there. If you don't really have the timing locked down, or if you find timing your frames, and by timing I mean in the timeline, spacing out the keyframes in the timeline, if that's not your strong suit, then you can actually do the opposite, and you can cover that up by just drawing more frames and making it more detailed. And maybe it goes along at a steady rate where the timing is not ideal, but because you've got so many frames and you've built loads of detail in, it will kind of compensate for that, and it will still look good. If you are using these sheets to make a bowl-like splash, so I recommend that you design the shape of the bowl first. So don't go through continuously. Don't do like start on frame 1 and then go through to frame 25 in sequence. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I wouldn't do that. What I would do is, let's say the bowl is the most prominent on frame 5. I would draw frame 5 first, and I would design it. So maybe look at some reference of like nice bowl shaped splashes, draw that and make sure you've got it nice, and then I would kind of go back and think, okay, how can I create that bowl back in time, and then I would go forwards in time and create the aftermath of it and have all of the droplets and everything. So other features I'll quickly mention of a typical water splash. You generally have a secondary splash. So now we've got it's going out like that. What's going to happen a lot of the time, if we imagine under the surface of the water, so let's say it's a stone and it's gone into the water like that. Let's say it's about there. The force of that has now created a vacuum, an air vacuum, where you see this trail of air, water rushes in to fill that vacuum. And because it rushes in so fast, it then shoots back up the vacuum here and creates a really nice looking column of water. Yeah, basically that's an extra feature that you should look out for. It looks beautiful when it happens properly. Let's say this stone is a little bit bigger this time, it's more of a big rock. It will look more like a kind of swell. So that might look a bit more like... So that's another feature. Ripples are another feature. You saw some ripples in the sheet example. Ripples are actually super simple. They're like one of the first things you can animate, I'd say. Pretty little ring that just extends and just moves outwards at a fairly constant rate. Over time it will lose energy and it will also become less pronounced, so just fade it out by doing this. You see how the gaps kind of become wider, and then they get smaller and smaller. They dissipate like this. So this is an example of seeing it over multiple frames. It will look really nice and you can do them very easily. Take that and just bring these in like that and force that perspective on it, because that will look much more convincing on the surface of the water than if you just have like an oval shape. Now it depends on the surface, it depends on what perspective, what kind of vanishing point you have and everything, but that generally looks a little bit better. Is to not draw the entire circle like what I've done here. I would actually just draw it partially or something, and that looks a lot nicer and it looks a lot more realistic. The reason for that is because of the way that light hits the surface of the water. You might also have air bubbles. Their own behavior is very different from what happens on the surface of the water. You'll see if air bubbles get pushed down, they will try and make their way to the surface, except it doesn't work in exactly the opposite way of gravity. It has to move the water that's on top of it below it. So it doesn't exactly just shoot back up towards the surface with a lot of speed. It takes a while. That's a whole different ball game. So I invite you to simplify your water splashes in your own way, and how you decide to simplify it will become your style. So don't be afraid to simplify it, and think about how you're going to simplify it to save you time and everything. Look for concave and convex curves as well. Now I get these two terms mixed up, I must admit. So I've seen, especially in Animate, that they will animate a lot of their water effects with, I think it's convex curves. So for example, you see how all of these lines that I'm drawing, they're all quite pointy and all of the curves are aimed inwards. So this is just a quick sketch to get across what I mean. So I see this a lot in Animate, and I really like it. I think it's a very sharp aesthetic. It can look really cool. On the other side, you might see a lot of the traditional kind of Disney splashes. They will have the opposite. If you look at a classic Disney splash, it might look a little bit more curvaceous and a little bit more friendly. If you look at something like Fantasia 2000s, great film, it's got amazing effects animation, it will probably look a little bit more like this. This is just to make you aware that these kind of styles are out there and they're really cool, and I want you to experiment with your own and see, maybe you want to do a little bit of both. There are many different ways in which you can interpret these effects, and you can get some really interesting results when you do decide to interpret them in creative ways. There are two places you can go to if you want to study this more in depth. These are two of my mentors. Adam Phillips is the guy who taught me effects animation. I really recommend his effects masterclass course on biteycastle.com. This really is the best online course for effects animation. I'm not even sponsored by Adam Phillips. I just feel like I owe him so much, and he taught me so well from his course. That is where you go if you want to be an effects animator and you want to learn from one of the best in the industry. Adam Phillips, biteycastle.com, effects masterclass. Also the book Elemental Magic. I had a look through it before making this lesson just to check and just to give myself a few ideas. He's also got some video tutorials which go with it, and these are very helpful. One more name I've been meaning to mention for some time now is Alejandro Garcia. He teaches FX animation and is an effects consultant for DreamWorks. His YouTube channel is full of very helpful and specific videos. They're great for if you're trying to work on a specific type of effects animation and you wish to expand your scientific understanding of it. So check out his channel and subscribe to him. I would really appreciate it also if you could consider supporting me on patreon.com. So the link to my Patreon page is in the description. It will help for me to continue making these videos and continue making them at high quality. I'll leave that in the description for you to check out. Lots of cool rewards as well for people who do decide to become my patron. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.